It was a dark night in Guadalajara, Jalisco. The streets, normally full of life and color, were silent, interrupted only by the occasional roar of an engine or the murmur of hurried conversations. It was 2015, a year that would mark a turning point in the history of organized crime in Mexico. In this city, violence was neither accidental nor isolated. It was a manifestation of a force that had grown in the shadows, an organization that operated with near-military precision and challenged both the state and civil society. The Jalisco New Generation Cartel, known by its acronym CJNG. What sets the CJNG apart is not just its size or capacity for violence, but a way it emerged from a fragmented power context, replacing old structures of trafficking with more sophisticated, strategic, and, in many ways, more terrifying model. Its rise is inseparable from the history of other cartels that dominated Mexico's Pacific region for decades. Following the dismantling of the Sinaloa cartel and the weakening of the Molinio cartel in the early 2010s, a power vacuum opened, one that the CJNG quickly exploited. At the head of this organization is Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, alias El Mencho. Little is known for certain about his early years, but according to journalistic investigations and reports from the DEA and Mexico's Secretary of Security and Citizen Protection, Mencho was born in 1966 in Michoacan, in a rural, impoverished context that shaped his vision of survival and power. His first steps into organized crime appear to have been linked to drug production and territorial violence, learning control and extortion strategies that he would later scale to a much larger level. The CJNG did not emerge overnight. Its ascent was marked by strategic alliances, calculated betrayals, and meticulous exploitation of the drug market in Mexico and the United States. From controlling trafficking routes for methamphetamine, cocaine, and fentanyl to infiltrating seemingly legitimate businesses like construction and trade, the cartel consolidated a hybrid criminal model, sophisticated, decentralized, and at the same time extremely violent when necessary. The CJNG's violence is methodical and symbolic. Attacks on rivals, massacres, and open confrontations with law enforcement are not only tools for territorial control. They are messages intended to instill fear, loyalty, and submission in the communities where they operate. In states like Jalisco, Guanajuato, Veracruz, and Michoacan, residents have learned to live under a constant state of alert, where the sound of gunfire can mark the start of a cycle of violence lasting days, weeks, or even months. According to reports by the civil organization Mexico Evalúa, between 2015 and 2020, cartel-related homicides in these regions increased significantly, demonstrating the direct impact of CJNG's expansion on public security. Violence is not the cartel's only tool. Systematic corruption of local, state, and in some cases federal authorities has been crucial for its survival. Investigative journalism and reports from the National Human Rights Commission indicate that officials and police officers have received regular payments in exchange for information, protection, or minimal intervention during criminal operations. This institutional infiltration has allowed the CJNG to operate with a level of impunity that challenges traditional authorities, complicating any eradication or control strategy. The state's response has been multifaceted, though with mixed results. Joint operations by the Secretary of National Defense, the National Guard, and the federal police have achieved low and mid-level captures, but the cartel's central leadership, particularly Mencho, has remained elusive. In 2015 and 2018, Mexican authorities, with support from U.S. agencies, launched high-profile operations to capture or neutralize Mencho. Results were limited due to the cartel's operational complexity, its cell-based structure, and its capacity to anticipate intelligence moves. A turning point in CJNG's recent history was the operation to capture one of its main lieutenants, publicly known as Operation Jalisco, in 2015. This operation, involving hundreds of Navy and Army personnel, revealed both the cartel's planning capacity and the state's difficulties in neutralizing it. The confrontations were intense, with high-caliber weaponry and urban guerrilla tactics, leaving dozens dead and injured, including criminals and security agents. The operation demonstrated that the CJNG could not only withstand direct attacks from the state, but could turn each confrontation into a message of strength and territorial control. The social impacts of this violence are profound and long-lasting. Entire communities in Jalisco and Guanajuato live under constant fear of reprisals, kidnappings, and extortion. Social fabric is fragmented, with internal migration being a frequent response to the inability of local authorities to guarantee security. Schools, markets, and public spaces become zones of risk where young people face the choice of migrating, joining crime, or living in a constant state of vigilance. Urban sociology and violence study from institutions like SIDE have documented how this criminal presence alters patterns of daily life, generates distrust in institutions, and directly affects local economies, limiting investment and hindering regional development. Politically, the CJNG exerts pressures beyond immediate security concerns. State governments have had to balance military action with public perception, avoiding confrontations that could cause significant collateral damage. At the same time, the relationship between organized crime and politics is complex. Investigative journalism and organizations like Insight Crime have reported that indirect campaign financing or pressure on local authorities is part of the cartel strategy to consolidate power structurally, weakening the state's institutional capacity. However, the CJNG is not invincible. Its structure, while robust, faces internal tensions and external rivalries. Competition with other cartels, international pressure, and state responses create a constant high-risk environment. In recent years, internal fractures, captures of key secondary figures, and clashes, while not critically weakening the organization, show that its power is not absolute. Security analysts from the National Autonomous University of Mexico emphasize that the cartel's resilience depends both on its adaptability and on the persistence of institutional gaps in the national security strategy. Reflecting on the CJNG's impact, it is evident that this is not merely an isolated criminal phenomenon. It is an indicator of broader challenges in Mexico: institutional weakness, corruption, socioeconomic inequality, and the difficulty of offering viable alternatives to vulnerable communities. Each operation, confrontation, and capture represents a chapter of the struggle, but also a reminder that organized violence has deep roots that do not vanish with the capture of a leader. Mexico's future in this context depends on combining strategies: institutional strengthening, international coordination, public policies focus on prevention, and above all, rebuilding trust between citizens and authorities. The history of the CJNG teaches that organized crime is resilient, but also that its presence and power ultimately reflect structural failures, requiring complex, sustained, and multidimensional solutions. In conclusion, the story of a Jalisco New Generation cartel is not only the story of a man or an armed group. It is a narrative of a country facing the ongoing challenge of balancing law, justice, and the daily lives of millions of people. As Mexico continues to confront these forces, the testimony of communities, analysts, and authorities reminds us that the struggle is not only against crime, but for the reconstruction of trust, respect for institutions, and the possibility of a safe future for all. Every bullet, every operation, and every strategy of the CJNG leaves a deep mark, but also offers essential lessons about the fragility and resilience of the Mexican state. Closely following these stories, analyzing them rigorously, and understanding their context is the only way to approach the truth behind the violence, and perhaps to imagine a Mexico where law and security can prevail over fear and impunity.